Now this is an interesting little story I picked up. I think it was on Godlike Productions actually, but someone posted on there, and this was actually yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday, Sunday. And they said, listen, I work in the gas and well industry as far as instrumentation, such as pressure gauges, things like that. And he said, my company is the one that supplies and supports, maintains those things. And on average, let's say daily average, you might get 1 or 2 overpressure releases on the valves that they have, which is when they see high pressure, they do an automatic release so that the lines and stuff when the wells don't blow. It's an automatic thing that happens. So he says, you know, 10 to 15 pounds of pressure, you know, PSI, 10 to 15 PSI is typical and enough to cause it to pop off, you know, relief or whatever. And that may happen once or twice a day. It's standard. He says, and I don't remember what day he said specifically, but it was like, you know, Friday or Saturday or whatever of this past week. He says, man, we got like at least 150 calls for maintenance, all basically at once, or you know, the same time frame, the same day. Matter of fact, I think he said it was between 4 and 6 p.m. as a matter of fact, and he was out of Texas. So between 4 to 6 p.m. they had a massive number of companies calling, saying, can you check the gauges? Can you check the equipment? And this thing, it's showing that it went up to like 45 psi, which doesn't happen. So they, you know, and each of these people that called in didn't realize this happened for a whole crap load of people between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. They, you know, they're thinking they're an isolated incident naturally. So this guy is saying, what the heck, you know, what the hell just happened? You know, what happened between 4 and 6 p.m. that caused these gauges to spike all over the place, mostly throughout Texas, because that's where the area that they handle. So could this have happened in other places? Yeah, possibly, but maybe he doesn't know because they only service Texas or something, I'm not sure. So I thought about that, and you know, right off the bat I'm thinking to myself, well, the sun itself is becoming, and has become for a little while now, very active, a lot more violent, a lot more X-class flares than we're normally seeing in any given year. Even though nothing's happened, no satellites got knocked out, right? I mean, I understand, but we've seen more than normal. There's more activity than normal, etc. This has to do with the 2012 date, the December 21st, 2012 Mayan calendar thing. I'm sure it does. That does not mean that all of a sudden there's going to be some catastrophe at the end of the year that I can sit here and say that I know is going to happen for sure. I have no idea. But I do know this is a cycle, and this is the end of that cycle. That takes thousands of years. So if the sun becomes more violent, then the earth inside of it, its core, and all the planets as well, become more violent. So if our earth's core, filled with magma, of course, and whatever the hell else is down there, honestly, is becoming more violent, then you would see an increase in violent earth changes or that kind of thing, right? So maybe that's why the ice caps are melting. It's not because the air is too hot, it's because the ground is getting warmer. That could be why ice caps are melting. Also, the volcanic activity, which I follow, is up, and more up over the last few years. Like 100% one year, 200 more percent, 400 more percent. You know, just an incredible amount of volcanic activity. Again, even though no major catastrophic event has taken place yet, and I say yet because I think some big stuff could be coming. Whether it's this year, next year, 2014, something, it has to happen. Again, these cycles have to peak, right? Everything peaks, climax, and then it goes, you know, back to whatever. We haven't seen that yet. So even if in 2013 the data is still showing more activity, then that just goes to show you the peak was not in December 21st, 2012, end of the Mayan calendar. It still has some more time to come. And I still will be paying attention. And again, one of the places I don't want to be is in Florida or any coastal city, anywhere for that matter. You got the Webbot with its global coastal event that it's still talking about is coming, and they believe it'll happen from any time from, say, now till June or so of 2013, only because the remote viewers from Courtney Brown's group did a little test from 2008, the same areas of the United States, to see what it looked like, and then said, all right, let's go into the future now. Which actually it wasn't, you know, this was years and years and years ago. Matter of fact, the test was before 2008 from what I understand. So they wanted to see, well, what is, let's say, you know, let's say they did it in 2006 or 2008, and I don't remember the exact day they did it, but they did this remote viewing session and said, what does 2008 look like? It looked the same, you know, as it did that day, you could say. Then they went into the same time frame, except 2013, you know, June of 2013 this time, way out in the future as far as they were concerned, you know, 8, 9, 10 years ago, whatever it was. What does it look like? And it was pretty different. Significantly different. And from what they described, it appeared definitely something or some things had happened on old planet Earth. And some of the locations that they remote viewed definitely had some issues with water, flooding, and they weren't sure if something like a meteor slammed into the ocean and caused something. There's something. Coastal areas having problems, things like that. So Cliff High thought about that, said, man, this sounds like the global coastal event I've been forecasting in these Webbot reports. That's still in the data, hasn't gone away. And he decided to contact Courtney Brown to see if they could do a remote viewing session with him as the leader or the session giver, whatever they call that. And he decided, and he said, yeah, we can do that. So Cliff Hyde, again, the owner of the Webbot, contacted him and said to himself, I'm going to make something up in my mind that's completely fake. And that's going to be the target that I want these guys in the remote viewing session to tell me about. That way, there's no way Courtney Brown can guess what I'm talking about. The people that are going to do the session, his group, they're not going to know. They can't possibly get lucky and nail some area that I happen to have in mind. I'm going to make it up. It's fake. But it will exist in my head, and that'll be the target. And they did it, and they nailed his target in his head. They nailed it. It was at that point where he just immediately gave massive respect to remote viewing. And that was, I think that was this year, just earlier this year that he did this, I believe. So he's he's sold on the remote viewing stuff, and now he's thinking in his mind, oh, this could be the event of what my forecast for the Webbot report is about, the global coastal event. So stuff is happening. It's happening underground. I mean, again, we've got this thing in space that we're passing through, this thing that NASA talked about, some kind of plasma thing that even NASA recognized. You have that guy, Dr. LaViolette, I think is how you pronounce his name, where he talks about the superwave theory, and that the superwave, whatever it consists of, comes from the center of the galaxy and pulses. And again, as we get closer to that lining up of our solar system with the galactic center of the universe, the Milky Way galaxy, that's when we get aligned with these little pulses of waves or whatever they are. And he mentioned that this theory of his, which, by the way, this guy has multiple PhDs. He's not some clown, not some bozo. And some of his earlier theories that people scoffed at, that he even sent personally to pretty high-level scientists at NASA, didn't even want to have nothing to do with them. They've actually are proven true now. Naturally, no one's going to give him credit. And he said the reason they don't give you credit is because no scientist ever wants to give another scientist credit. They want to take all the credit, of course. And that's the same way in NASA with their scientists, and they didn't want to talk about it with him, so they would just pretend that it never happened. Having said that, his superwave theory says, if it's right, he says, if my theory is right, this superwave thing will be preceded, in front of it will have a gravity wave. That will be the only, because it's coming at the speed of light, there's not going to be a little knock or warning, but there will be somewhat of a warning with the gravity wave, because the gravity wave is in front of the superwave. So the gravity wave will come first and hit the Earth prior to, and I don't know how soon prior to the superwave hitting, and that would cause a lot of volcanic and earthquake type of activity to increase, noticeably increase. Well, I can tell it's already increased, obviously, and then you look at the data coming from, you know, scientists and these meters and the above 7 earthquakes and destructive earthquakes, etc., and you can see there's something going on. Now, maybe what I'm seeing now, thinking, well, is that the gravity wave? May not even be the gravity wave coming yet, and it may be coming here shortly. And then to be preceded that, you know, that's preceding the superwave, whatever the hell the superwave does. And he goes on to talk about the ice core samples that he was able to study, which were basically hand-me-down ice core samples that other scientists were looking at other data in, and he got basically the scraps, so to speak. But he was more than delighted to take them because they had several hundreds of thousands of years of data in the ice core samples of climate data. And in those ice core samples, he saw these 3 specific, you know, dirty rings or whatever inside the ice core samples, and they were spaced out just about perfectly all the way down. He's like, what is that? So he did his little analysis, and he mentioned some of the chemical components found in those 3 little rings. 3 rings here, 3 rings here, 3 rings all the way down, 3 rings, space, 3 rings, space, etc. And he goes on, if you see his video, just look up superwave theory on YouTube. Project Camelot superwave theory. It's a fantastic interview with this guy. You got to listen to it. It's older, but these 3 rings have some chemical in it that he says we know nowadays that this comes from outer space. It doesn't come from the moon. It doesn't come from the planet Earth or any other planet. It doesn't come from an asteroid. It's something that we recognize as out in deep space kind of thing, and it bombarded our planet in these 3 times, these 3 rings each time. It bombards our planet, obviously from this ice core sample telling me it does. So what is making this happen is what got his brain going. Why is this 3 times here, space, 3 times space, 3 times space? What's that about? Clearly there's a cycle. Well, the cycle is every, and don't quote me on these numbers because I haven't seen it in a while, but it's like every 26,000 years. Well, that's funny because that's the precession of the equinox. All the ages, the 12 ages in the sky, each age is 2,160 years, etc. All 12 of those is approximately 26,000 years long. So that's interesting. Half of that or so is the other part of the cycle. So it looks like every half of the 26,000 years, this also happens again, roughly. And then the third and most important cycle in my mind is 5,125 years. That is exactly the length of the Mayan calendar, to the T. And the Mayans, which were around 3,000 years ago, roughly, started their calendar then, and it ends again on December 21st, 2012. But the cycle had already begun when they were around. It was actually 2,000 more years prior to them the cycle had started. Because again, it's a 5,125 year cycle. So somehow these people knew or picked up on it then, with some kind of knowledge, whatever, got it, and told the rest of us, you may want to pay attention. Here's the end of the cycle. Here's the beginning. And we weren't even around at the beginning, because that was the end of the last cycle. So for you and I, 5,125 years is pretty important. Now here's the other interesting thing. When these little rings in the ice core sample, again, 26,000 years, 13,000 years, and 5,125 years, sometimes one of the rings would be a bit more powerful, filled with that gunk or whatever, that, you know, space particles, whatever the hell they were called, more than the other 2. But there was no rhyme or reason to which one would have more than the other. So it was almost random. They're all 3 coming, right? Every 3 of the cycles, we're gonna get bombarded with this stuff, whatever it is. But out of any of those 3 cycles, it could be any of them that got bombarded more than the other 2. Like, just an extra dosage comes every now and then. That kind of thing. That's not to say that this time around, you know, and let's assume it's 2012, you know, the December date, or around that time period anyways, you know, the end of the Mayan calendar. Let's assume it's going to happen again. That doesn't mean that I'm going to sit here and assume it's going to be the big one, the worst one or whatever. There's no rhyme or reason. So then they asked him, well, now that you know that there's these cycles and you can tell all the way down the end of this ice core sample, where are we at now with the cycle? He said, well, we're due for one any day now. Any day it can happen. And she says, well, how within what range? Like, what do you mean? He says, well, our data, our technology, in order to gather that data, like, for example, carbon dating to figure out how old these things are, it's, when you start going back like that, it's only accurate up to about 400 years. So there's a plus or minus 400 years that this event can happen. And that's only because of the technology he used. So he stressed that. And she said, well, if we're due for one any time now, simply because of the 400-year margin of error that you're talking about, that means it's 5,125 years sometime around now. So how do we pinpoint where we are, really? And she said, well, we have the Mayan calendar that, strangely, funny enough, ends specifically on a date, not at 400 years, but a single day, December 21st, 2012. Dr. La Violette, what's your opinion on that? And that's when he said, well, in all fairness, I can't say that I know it's going to happen on that date. I can't say it because I'm a scientist, and our knowledge, our equipment gives us that 400 years of error. So I have to tell you, it could happen on December 21st, 2012, plus or minus 400 years. Or, could go out another 400 years. However, the Mayans gave us an exact date. And the amount of information and knowledge they had on cycles and the stars and the alignments and all these things, the planets that we didn't even discover until the early 1900s, they already had 3,000 plus years ago, sitting there waiting on us to say, well, we already knew this. How? I don't know how. And as a matter of fact, I don't care how. What I do care about is they had it. And if they were that smart or advanced or whatever the hell, whatever knowledge they had, and they also decided to be the ones to give us a date in the future to pay attention to, I don't think I care about the plus or minus 400 year thing. Oh, I might be dead, my kids might be dead before this ever happens, so I don't care. No, this is this year. Again, does that mean something's going to happen on the stroke of midnight on that day? No. What if it's a year or two off? I mean, could there be a tiny margin of error from the big event? Not 400 years, but 2 or 3 years. Maybe. Nobody knows. We're fixing to find out. That's all I can tell you. So, anyways, take care.